Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaste everybody. As we know, Sarala did not translate Vyasa Mahabharata, Sarala retold it. By retold, we mean that he added episodes which did not exist in Vyasa Mahabharata. He deleted episodes that occurred in Vyasa Mahabharata. He modified some episodes. By modified, we mean he expanded some of them and contracted some of them. And he on the whole, he reconceptualized Vyasa Mahabharata and wrote it in Odia. Now, this retelling is not something new to the Mahabharata tradition, or the retelling is not something that is new when we think of the tradition of the Mahabharata narration. It is said that Vyasa told the story of the Mahabharata in just 4 slokas. Later, Narada expanded it to a text of 30 lakh slokas. It is said that Shuka, there are others in between, and then Shuka contracted it, reduced the 30,000 slokas into 14, and then Vaishampayana reduced the 14 lakh slokas into just 1 lakh, and it is Vaishampayana's version that goes by the name of Vyasa Mahabharata. That is one tradition. So, there are actually not just Vyasa wrote the original or Vyasa composed the original, but there are others who were retailers. It is just that the Vaishampayana's text also goes by the name of Vyasa. So, what we call Vyasa Mahabharata, from the point of view of this tradition, it is actually Vaishampayana's retelling of Mahabharata, which was originally composed by Vyasa. So, this retelling is not new to the composition of Mahabharata. So, when Vyasa Mahabharata was retold in Vyasas, in different Vyasas, like Odia, like Marathi, like Bengali, like Telugu, Tamil, Kannada. When it was retold, then the poets took considerable freedom in retelling the story. So, taking freedom with the basic narrative is not something new, it is a part of the tradition. In fact, I must tell you that there is an alternative tradition to the composition of concerning the composition of the Mahabharata, in which Narada and Vaishampayana etc. do not figure. It is said that the first text in this respect was called Jaya, where Jaya means victory, and then Jaya was expanded. Jaya was composed in just 8,000 slokas. Now, Jaya was expanded to Bharata, and Bharata was composed in 24,000 slokas. Now, Mahabharata is composed in 1 lakh slokas. So, this is an alternative tradition, and all these are attributed to Vyasa. So, surely Vyasa was not an individual. So, we are not talking about Vyasa as an individual. We are talking about probably a title of poets who probably a title and probably a title of many poets, and the title was Vyasa. So, let us not go into those things. We say that going by tradition, we say that Vyasa Mahabharata was composed in 1 lakh slokas. In one tradition, as I just mentioned, it was Vaishampayana, whose work goes by Vyasa Mahabharata. In another, it is Vyasa Mahabharata, composed by Vyasa. So now Sarala has retold Vyasa's story following the same approach as had been followed earlier in the composition of the text. So, if Vyasa Mahabharata contains 1 lakh slokas as it is claimed to do, Sarala Mahabharata contains 1,40,000 padas. Roughly, we can translate both pada and sloka roughly as couplets. So, from one point of view, in terms of the number of couplets, Vyasa Mahabharata is 40,000 couplets smaller than Sarala Mahabharata. But that does not really mean much because there are lots of considerations. What can be said in a very compressed way in Sanskrit cannot be said in that compressed manner in Odia. Therefore, these numerical differences do not really matter. They do not really explain anything very seriously. But in any case, so there have been so this is clear that there have been episodes. Sarala has added episodes which did not exist in the earlier in Vyasa Mahabharata, and he has deleted episodes and from what were there in Vyasa Mahabharata. Now, today let us look at some of the episodes that he has added. By now we have referred to episodes where or episodes in Vyasa Mahabharata which Sarala in his retelling modified, like the beginning of the war. So, we know the account was something in Vyasa Mahabharata, the account is something else in Sarala Mahabharata. So, it is a modified version. So, the same episode exists, but treated differently. And we looked at the same thing with respect to Draupadi's disrobing, and we have been doing it. And the second game of dice, how the second game of dice was played. So, we have mentioned these episodes and have discussed them in some depth to show how Sarala reconceptualized and retold the episodes. Now, we are saying today we are dealing with some episodes which were not there in Vyasa Mahabharata at all. And one of these is the quarrel between Hidimbi or Hidimbika as she is called in Sarala Mahabharata, and Draupadi. Now, Hidimbika or Hidimbi was the demoness wife of Bhima. So, Bhima had married a demoness, and the name of that demoness is Hidimba or Hidimbaki as Hidimbaki, and they had a child. The name of the child was Ghatotkacha. So, Ghatotkacha was the when Ghatotkacha became young, he became the king of a forest kingdom, and when he became the king, his mother, who had looked after him, that is Hidimbiki, she knew that she had anointed him king following the Aryan tradition, because Bhima was an Aryan, Arya, and Bhima was the father. So, although she was an Asuri, so she followed and she did not belong to the Arya tradition, but the Anarya tradition. She anointed her son Ghatotkacha, the king of that forest kingdom, following the rituals as required in the Arya tradition. And the child knew, her son knew what the Arya tradition and what the Arya cultures, what the Arya modes of thinking are. He knew that. She had taught them all this. She had so the child was aware of so her son was aware of both traditions, the Asuric tradition and also the Arya tradition. So he knew both. Now Yudhishthira was performing Rajasuya Yajna. Vyasa was the Purohit. He was the priest who was to conduct that yajna. The main priest was to conduct that yajna. And the auspicious moment came. Yudhishthira was sitting with Draupadi, and there are many there are many other rishis who were participating in the conduct of the yajna, and many rishis came as guests, came as guests. Then there were his brothers, and many others, Duryodhana and Kauravas and so many others. So many were there who had come. Now, no matter how much they tried, no matter how many mantras they chanted, no matter how much ghee they poured, nothing would happen. The fire of the home of fire would not burn. The home of fire did not emerge. So they were worried what was happening. Did something inauspicious take place? But Vyasa said, no, there was no problem like that. There is nothing inauspicious. It is just that Yudhishthira does not have a son. So a son has to be so the person who is conducting this the person who is performing this yajna, Rajasuya yajna, that person must have a son. The Jajman must have a son. That the word that was used was Jajman. The Jajman must have a son. Yudhishthira was the Jajman, and he didn't have a son. Therefore, the fire would not burn. So what does one do then? Yudhishthira was advised by the sages that Bhima had a son. Of the 5 Pandavas, Bhima alone had a son, and if Bhima's son came, that would amount to Yudhishthira's son having come, and the fire would burn, the fire would emerge, yajna fire would emerge. Now there is a certain story behind this as to how, although the Pandavas were 5 different persons, in some sense they were connected by in some way they were connected, and it was as though there was one who had distributed himself into 5 and resided in part in each of them. We need not go to that story here. That is not necessary for our purpose. But there is a story which shows how, when Bhima's son came, how come it was taken as though Yudhishthira's son has arrived. So logically the only thing is you connect them somehow, that the same thing had divided itself into 5 different into 5 different parts, and each part resided in one Pandava. So that is one logical way of dealing with this, and that was done, and that is what Sarala's story is. But we are not concerned with that story here. So the fire burned. But then how? Sorry. So Yudhishthira was advised to do this. Yudhishthira was advised to do this, and Bhima was told to invoke his son Ghatotkacha, and Bhima did that. So Ghatotkacha knew that his father was his father had invoked him, and his father wanted him to go to the Rajasuya Yajna. So he told his mother, Hidimvaki, that father wants me to go to Rajasuya Yajna, and I will go. Hidimvaki says, go, but do the following. When you go there, you first pay your respects to your father Bhima. Next, you pay your respects to Krishna. Then bow to Vyasa, and then to Yudhishthira. Period. Ghatotkacha knew that Draupadi had not been named. Draupadi was born out of the sacred fire, and she was a Brahmin. She was a Brahmin born, and born out of sacred fire. So how could she not be paid respect to? That was the doubt in his mind, and he was afraid. He was afraid that he might be cursed. Now, Hidimbaka, the mother, his mother could figure it out and said that you are scared of Draupadi, so do not worry, I will come with you. So what she did was, she did not go with him really in that sense. He entered the space where he entered the area where the Rajaswi Yajna was being held, and she was waiting outside. Nobody knew that she had come. So Ghatotkacha went inside, and he did exactly as his mother had told him to do. Draupadi Draupadi was extremely upset. She felt that Ghatotkacha had humiliated her in public. So she cursed him. She said that you have listened to your mother, and your mother was an ignoramus. Your mother is an ignoramus, and you are an ignoramus too. So you have disrespected me. I curse you. You know who I am. I am Yudhishthira's wife. I am born out of, I am a Brahmin born, and I am born out of the sacred fire, sacred yajna. So I curse you. Since you have humiliated me in public, I curse you. And what was the curse? It was a terrible curse actually. Ghatotkacha was a Kshatriya. So the curse was that Ghatotkacha would be killed without fighting. Ghatotkacha would be killed in the battlefield when he was not fighting. So to be killed in the battlefield without, when one is not fighting, was something considered to be extremely degrading, degenerating for a Kshatriya. That was a terrible way of dying. The dignified way of dying is go to the battlefield, fight and die. You win or you die. So dying in the battlefield, fighting was considered to be glorious and true, and that was the death that a Kshatriya was considered proper. That was the death that the Kshatriyas thought was honorable. But he was cursed to die without fighting when he was not fighting in the battlefield. That was a very degrading kind of death that she had cursed him with. Now Hidimbaki, who was waiting outside, heard what she had said. So she rushed into the yajna area and shouted at Draupadi. She said, "My son has been anointed king following the Arya tradition. He is the king. He is not supposed to bow to a fallen woman. You are an asati. You are an asati, you have 5 husbands. That is not the tradition of the Aryas. And my son, who is the king, cannot bow, was not expected to bow to a fallen woman like you. And I curse you." And he said, and she said, you have no issue right now. You don't have any sons, you don't have any issue. But someday you will have children, and I curse your children. The unborn children I curse, they will all die young. So they cursed each other. Bhima's son would die, and so would Draupadi's children. Now everybody kept, there was a lull in the hall. Among the assembled, there was a complete lull. The 2 women had cursed each other, and had destroyed each other's children through that curse. Now Krishna asked Vyasa, Vyasa, look at your text and see how this is going to materialize. So what Vyasa did was, he opened his pothi, he opened his text and told Krishna how Draupadi's children will be killed and how Ghatotkacha will be killed. Talking about Ghatotkacha, he said that in the text it is written that Karna's Shakti would kill him when he would not be fighting. Details don't concern us. Sometime maybe we'll be, we'll talk. Maybe I can tell you the detail what happened here. Karna had got a Shakti, a kind of very powerful divine power, and it had the form of a spear, and the appropriate mantra has to be invoked, and the spear would become a terrible Shakti, and then whoever Arjuna wanted to kill with that Shakti would go and kill. It is an unfailing Shakti. Whoever is the target, the Shakti would hit. Nothing can stop it. So Karna had reserved it for Arjuna. And during their fight, one day during their fight, when Drona was the commander-in-chief, during their fight, Karna threw that arrow at Arjuna. Now what Krishna did was, before Krishna knew what Karna was doing, so Krishna asked Ghatotkacha to go behind Arjuna's chariot. And nobody ever questioned Krishna. Why are you saying this? Was not something that anybody ever asked Krishna. Whatever he said, people agreed to, without any questioning. It was rarely that there was a discussion with Krishna with respect to the logic of his stand or with respect to why he was saying what he was saying, very, very rarely. But otherwise, if he said something, it was done. So Ghatotkacha, in pure surrender to Krishna's words, went behind Arjuna's chariot. And when that Shakti was thrown at Arjuna, what Krishna did was, he removed the chariot, and Ghatotkacha was exposed to the Shakti, and the Shakti killed Ghatotkacha and he died. So this is how Draupadi's curse materialized. He died without fighting. And the story of Draupadi's children we already have told in this course, so we don't have to recount that. Now, this is one story, the quarrel between Ghatotkacha and the quarrel between Gandhari, the quarrel between Draupadi and Hidimbi. Now this, to repeat, does not occur in Vyasa Mahabharata. This is Sarala's addition. Consider another story. This time the quarrel between Kunti and Gandhari. Both Kunti and Gandhari used to go to a particular Shiva temple to worship Shiva. That was their everyday ritual. So one day Gandhari discovered that the temple where she was going to worship Shiva was also the temple where Kunti used to come to worship Shiva. Kunti used to have her bath in the river and worship and come to the temple and worship Shiva before Gandhari arrived. That was a normal thing. That was a daily thing. But one day Kunti was late. So when Gandhari came, Kunti was in the temple worshipping Shiva. And when Gandhari found this, she was furious. Kunti's husband was dead, Pandu was no more, so Kunti was a widow and was powerless. And Gandhari's husband Dhritarashtra was the king of Hastinapura, and so she was the empress. So how dare Kunti worship in the same temple where she offered her worship. So she shouted at Kunti And Kunti responded, but then Bhagwan Mahadev materialized. He told Kunti and Gandhari that look, nobody is dear to us, so don't fight, nobody is dear to us. If you give us gifts, we are yours, otherwise no. We don't belong to anybody, so you give us whatever we want, and then we are yours. Now what is that Shiva wanted? Shiva said, by tomorrow morning when you come to worship, bring a champak flower made of gold. So that is what he said and disappeared. So Kunti was very upset, and Gandhari was of course elated, because Gandhari was the queen, and getting a champak flower was no problem for her. Getting a golden champak flower was no problem for her. She could get it immediately. All the state treasury was in her hands. It was in the hands of Dhritarashtra, and gold was not a problem for her. But there was nothing. Kunti was poor in the sense that she had nothing, no possessions that way. Where would she get golden champaks? And so she was upset, and her children found their mother upset. So they asked Kunti, mother, what is it that is bothering you? So Kunti said, children, don't worry yourselves. This is how it is. We cannot do anything. So Shiva will not be pleased with me, and Shiva will be pleased with Gandhari. Arjuna said, this is a non-problem. What is this big deal about a golden champak? I will get you golden champak in thousands. Now Kunti was wondering what was her child saying. What Arjuna did was, Arjuna told her mother that as always, you go and have your bath before Gandhari comes and takes her bath. You go and have your bath and go and worship, and you will see the champak flowers will be there. Indra shot that morning. Arjuna shot an arrow at the treasury of Indra, and 1,000 golden flowers, golden champak flowers, showered on they showered in the temple. So they fell from the sky as rain falls in showers from the sky, and then filled the entire temple compound with golden champakas. And when Gandhari came to have she came and had her bath, and when she entered the temple, she found the entire temple was full of golden champakas, and there was no place where she could put her foot even. Everything was full of champakas. All space was full of champakas. So Gandhari was embarrassed and was afraid. For the first time, real fear assailed Gandhari. She knew that her sons, her husband, and the Kuru king and the power of the Kurus is nothing in comparison with the power of Kunti's children. So, for the first time, she got afraid of Kunti. Let us consider one more episode. This involves Kunti and Madri. Kunti and Madri are the two wives of Pandu. Kunti was his first wife, Madri the second. Now, we don't have to go into that story, and that story is common in both Vyasa and Sarla. Pandu was cursed. He earned a curse that if she had union with a woman, then he would die. So he could not have union with Kunti or with Madri. So he was issueless. We know that Kunti had a son before her wedding, and that son we know came to be known as Karna later, and that story is well known. We have also mentioned We have also talked about Karna and Kunti in an earlier episode. You remember how Kunti took Kunti took Yudhishthira, Bhima and Arjuna to Karna when she knew where Karna was growing up, and how Karna took offense because Kunti had called Yudhishthira Jujesti. Jujesti, he thought that Jesti means the eldest, Jujesti. And she said that, and he said that you have called, although you know that I was alive, that she really did not know. Said that although I was alive, although I was the firstborn, you called Yudhishthira Yudhishthira, that you called her the eldest, and until he dies, I cannot be your eldest. And then Kunti was upset, and then they came back. So we know that episode. This is merely reminding you about what we had said. Now, so Kunti had so Kunti knew about this mantra. Durvasa had given her that mantra. She could invoke anyone and any god and get a child. And that is how she got Yudhishthira. So she took the permission of Pandu, her husband, and the sages also had advised her to go for an issue, and she went for, she invoked god Dharma, and Yudhishthira was born. But Yudhishthira, she noticed that Yudhishthira as a child was extremely kind-hearted, compassionate. And she knew that one who is so full of daya and dharma could simply not be the king. The king must be sometimes stone-hearted. Now Yudhishthira was extremely kind and generous and compassionate. So she knew that if Yudhishthira had to be the king, then he had to be supported by a strong brother. So she invoked god Pavana, and from god Pavana, wind god, she got Bhima. But she noticed that Bhima didn't have a very sharp vision. Bhima was not very sharp in his mind. His perceptions are rather crude. So she concluded that Bhima might be a very mighty, might grow up to a very mighty person, but he could never be an archer. The kind of eagle vision that a great archer needed, Bhima simply did not have that. He was very crude in his perceptions. Therefore, she thought that Bhima was not Bhima could not protect Yudhishthira. She needed one more child who she thought would be able to protect Yudhishthira alongside Bhima. And then she invoked god Indra, the god of gods. So Indra gave her Arjuna, and she was happy. And she was not inclined to have any other children, because that system would not allow somebody to have more children than necessary. She had in some sense violated that system by going for the second and the third, for her second and third child. She had already violated it. She did not want to do and asking for more or trying to get more would simply be a violation of that code. That code was called Niyoga. We don't have to go into details of what Niyoga was, how Niyoga started, what Bhagavan Parshurama had done, and how after that the society had to answer a certain kind of need, and how it came up with the system of Niyoga. All this we don't have to go into. In any case, so she thought that it would be sinful if she went for another child. So that was how it was. And one day, sage Agastya visited them, and sage Agastya told Kunti that, Kunti, now since you have 3 children, give that mantra and the garland that Durvasa had given you, give that to Madri. You give that to Madri. So Kunti was willing. She herself did not have any children, and Madri had served her very affectionately and served her very sincerely and diligently. So she was pleased with Madri. So she had no problem sharing that mantra and that garland with Madri. So but what happened was, um, Kunti asked sage Agastya. He is called sage Agastya in other versions, but in Sarala's version he is called both sage Agastya and much more frequently Agasti. So sage Agasti, she asked sage Agasti, how did you know about the mantra? How did you know about Durvasa's garland? And Agastya's answer was, I knew because I have created this. This is interesting. Agastya said that he had created that. He used the word sarjana. He used the appropriate form of the word sarjana, that is created. So he had created the story, he had created the narrative. And Kunti was surprised, and Agastya said, look, you want to know more? So I will tell you more. So he said what was going to happen in future. What is interesting from our point of view is that Agastya claims that he was the author of the story. He was the author of the story. Now, in the earlier case, when Krishna asked Vyasa, now open your pothi and tell us how Draupadi's curse would materialize and how Hidimba's curse would materialize, Vyasa had opened his pothi. So who is the author? Is it Vyasa or is it Agastya? Or were there multiple traditions in which different different sages were considered to be authors? We leave this question unanswered. In Sarala Mahabharata, Vyasa is also referred to be the author of the original version of Mahabharata, and here Agastya. So we leave the matter here. Maybe there are, as I said, maybe Mahabharata was composed in different traditions in this country, in different parts of the country, and different rishis were invoked, as different rishis were named as author. We leave the matter unanswered. But it is interesting to note this. It is interesting to note that what was happening was only an enactment of what was to happen. It is not that the story had already been told, and all these persons were actually actors on the stage, doing their acting or enacting their roles, and the roles were pre-assigned roles. We come to another story, and this is about Princess Amba's revenge. And this story is pretty different. This story is quite different. This story is quite new in the context of this story is quite new in Sarala. It doesn't exist in Vyasa Mahabharata. Now, Amba, Bhishma when Chitravirya and Bhishma wanted to marry Amba. Two of Amba's sisters had already been married to two of his brothers, and Amba had remained unmarried. She actually wanted to marry someone else. In any case, Bhishma's two brothers had been married to two sisters of Amba, Ambika and Ambalika, and Amba was unmarried. So Bhishma sent word to her father that why don't you give Amba in marriage to me? What her father had decided to do by then was to have a Swayamvara for Amba. Amba was to marry, Amba was attracted towards Salva and wanted to marry Salva, and a Swayamvara was something that would probably legitimize that. So Salva would come and other kings would come and she would choose Salva. But surely other kings did not know this, or probably her father also did not know this. but her father was her father was organizing a swayamvara for her. Now, this is when Bhishma sent word that when he heard about the swayamvara, he sent word. He said, "Why don't you give Amba in marriage to me?" And so when her father knew that Vishnu was interested in his daughter's hand, he didn't know what to do with the swayamvara. Kings would come and would they not feel humiliated? In any case, when the kings heard and the princess heard that Vishnu was interested in Amba, nobody came to swayamvara. They all returned, and even Shalu returned. He was coming, but he also returned, because everyone was scared of Vishnu. There was no one who could be compared to Bhishma in terms of. I mean, Bhishma was the greatest warrior. There was no one who could be a competitor to him. There was no equal to Bhishma. So everyone was afraid, and no one came. So he went and sort of. But when Bhishma, so Bhishma dressed himself in the bridal. In the dress of the bridegroom. He had already he had already dressed himself in the bridegroom's dress, and at the auspicious moment he was going to start. Then he found his father Shantanu. When he went to seek Shantanu's blessings before he started for Amba's house, he found Shantanu upset. He was an intelligent son and a very wise son, a person who was spiritually evolved and had a very keen sense of discrimination, was intelligent. So he could sense that his father was not very happy. So he asked his father, what was the reason? His father said that, look, there is a curse on me, and the curse is from Bhishma's mother and his former wife Ganga, his wife Ganga. And the curse was that Bhishma's child would kill him. Now notice let us recall in very brief what happened in Shala Mahabharata, in Vyasa Mahabharata. Bhishma, when Shantanu wanted to marry Satyavati, who was a fisherman's daughter, he couldn't express his desire to marry Satyavati because of the conditions that her father has imposed on him, and one of the conditions was that her son would become the king, and one of the conditions involved that Bhishma must have no children, because Shantanu may agree that her son would become the king, but what guarantee was there that later Bhishma's children would not want to take over kingship? So he had said, the fisherman had said that he would not give his daughter in marriage until these conditions are fulfilled. And when Bhishma knew this, that we all know, he took an oath, solemn oath, that he would never marry, so that the question of his children ever claiming their right on the throne of Hastinapura, that situation would never arise. So that was how Bhishma remained unmarried. Here it is not the same story. Here it is a different story. He had already dressed himself in the bridegroom's clothes. But when he found his father unhappy, he asked what. So his father said that his son would kill him. And Bhishma immediately threw those garlands which he was wearing, and all the bridegroom's dress that he was wearing, he threw them he said that I'm not going to marry because I don't want my son to kill my father. And in this story, in this story, Shantanu never married again. There was no Satyavati after Ganga in Shantanu's life here, and there are no conditions on him. But there are no conditions for marriage with Satyavati on him. The Satyavati was not associated with Shantanu. He didn't have a wife after Ganga. But here, unlike in Vyasa Mahabharata. So the situations are entirely different. The situations leading to Bhishma's taking that oath against marrying, that situation didn't obtain here, but it was a different situation. In any case, Bhishma decided not to marry. Now, what would happen to the girl? The girl was to marry Bhishma. Now Bhishma was unwilling to marry. What would happen to the girl? So, and Salva was no more interested. So Salva said that Bhishma already wanted to marry you. Bhima wanted to marry you. So whether he married you or not, I cannot marry you now. So Salva was not interested in marrying her. So she could neither go to, so she had no one. And her father was very worried, and her father brought her and left her in Bhishma's palace, saying that from now on this is your home, look after Bhishma and live your life. And saying this, he left. And the poor girl, she came there absolutely unwanted, and she did not know what to do. But Amba was a virtuous human being, and she lived there and did everything that could please Bhishma. He looked after him, she looked after him, she took care of him with great devotion, without any expectation. That is what she had done. That is what she was doing. So slowly what was happening was that Bhishma was feeling a sense of love towards her, an attachment towards her. She was so virtuous, and she had taken so much care of him that Bhishma started feeling a sense of attachment towards her. And Bhishma was worried, because he knew that a time may come, if this continued, a time may come when he would propose wedding with her. I mean, he would not be able to control himself, and so he might fall a prey to his desire. So he would either so fearing this, one day he asked his attendants to throw Amba out of the palace. So they threw Amba out. Poor Amba did not understand why this thing had happened. She had no idea that Bhishma was feeling inclined towards her, that Bhishma was already kind of feeling a sense of deep attachment towards her. She had no idea. And poor innocent woman, one fine morning, she was thrown out. And thrown out quite rudely. She didn't know what to do. Parshurama tried to help her, but did not succeed. So she went to Prague and took Jal Samadhi, sacrificed herself in the sacred waters of the river, with the wish that she would be the cause of Bhishma's destruction. And that was also the boon that Shiva had given him. So Shiva told him, that was the boon that Shiva had given her. And Shiva had told her that although she would not be able to kill Bhishma herself, she would be the cause of her death. No, she would be the cause of his death. And after that, she sacrificed herself in the waters of the river, sacred river, and was reborn as Shikhandi. And Shikhandi's story, we did not go into any detail here. She was not born a male, and how it was discovered, what kind of embarrassments it caused, and what kind of problems it caused, we skip. And by the grace of a Gandharva, she attained her manhood. Then she became a man. But Bhishma knew who Shikhandi was. Bhishma knew that Shikhandi was no other than Amba, and he knew the purpose of her birth. And Amba also knew why she was born, or at least either she knew or she was told. But in any case, Amba was not entirely unaware of her relationship with Bhishma. So this is a story that shows that karma phala pursues you relentlessly. If you do not experience the phala of the karma in one birth, it can pursue you to the next. It can pursue you to the next. Bhishma had been very unfair to her. Bhishma was feeling passionate towards her, but for that she was not responsible. She did not do anything to try and entice him. She was only doing what her father asked her to do. So it was not her fault. So Bhishma humiliated her and punished her for no fault of hers, and he was simply afraid of himself. But that was Bhishma's karma. It was an adharmic karma, and the phala he had to endure. In that life he could not endure. In that life he could not experience that phala. He had to wait, but that karma pursued him to the next life, when he had to suffer the consequences of what he had done. But Bhishma, we will come to how Bhishma sort of faced that situation and what he did. Let's not go into that today. So what does it mean? What we have found is that Bhishma. This story is important for us to understand the nature of karma and karma phala, and how karma phala continues. How there is no escape from karma and karma phala unless there is moksha from the cycle of life and death. The karmic cycle. In other words, the karmic cycle. There is no escape. So this is the Amba story, the story of Amba's revenge. When a storyteller who is retelling an existing story adds to those stories or adds to the existing story, then one question that naturally arises is there a narrative purpose to those stories, or do the stories exist in the new narrative for their own sake? So interesting stories, somebody composes interesting stories and just puts them there. Is it like that? Does a story exist in the narrative for its own sake, or this incorporated story performs a narrative purpose? Now we find that all of these stories perform narrative purposes, in the sense that each of these is related to an important idea. In one case, it is related to the poet's understanding of karma and karma phala. In the other cases that we mentioned, the idea is that the poet thinks, in the other cases, the poet thinks that when we come to the world, we actually have pre-assigned roles, and some of these pre-assigned roles are due to our karma. So when we come to the world, we come with a pre-assigned task, and we perform we perform that role in the world as an actor acts on the stage. The actor has no control over the story. The story has been given, the dialogues are given, the actor only has to enact the role. He does not create anything. Whatever he has been told, he does. Similarly, the world is a stage and we come with a program, with almost a program that we are supposed to do this, and that is what we do. So, this this is one of the, this is something which the poet believed in, and he implements this vision through these episodes. And the third one is that probably there are multiple traditions and of the composition of Mahabharata, and different poets were named as the authors of the text. So, viewed thus, we find that these stories have been incorporated quite harmoniously into the retelling. So, they are connected in an organic manner with the text, and they are not they do not seem like they do not seem like unwelcome incorporations. Thank you very much.